Right, good morning everybody and welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee meeting held on Wednesday the 26th of July. Just to let everybody aware, because you're probably wondering why I'm chairing it and not Councillor Morgan McGeehan. So Councillor Morgan McGeehan's wife had a baby late last week, so they've welcomed their son Joshua into the world, hence why you have me this morning in my lovely pink shirt on a Wednesday. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. So, do we have any apologies?
We have apologies for Councillor Repton, Councillor Sandhu and Councillor Morgan McGeehan. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, awesome.
Chair, can I just say I'm going to have to leave early.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we spoke about that, Sarah. That's absolutely fine. Late items to be introduced by the chair. I've got no late items to be introduced. Anybody else? All good? Brilliant. Okay, awesome. Let's move on. Declarations of interest. Speak now, forever hold your peace. Oh. Okay, noted. Cheers, Philip. Thank you. So we will quickly move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of July. You happy to move them? Seconder? Oh, yes, go.
Second the revised version.
Okay.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Awesome. So we will... Right, brilliant. Okay, cool. Right, so item number 5, Audit and Governance Committee. Oh, go on, Philip.
Anybody from EY again? Is there anything happened at 0523? Was it direct planning report? Anything happened subsequently? I understood they were going to turn up to every meeting, but and the dates of the meetings were reorganised to fit in with their programme, but evidently not.
Yeah, exactly. The meetings were scheduled around EY's availability. I've not heard anything from them, so I'll chase it up as to why no apologies have been received today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because it's not, if we've changed the meetings to fit them, it's not really acceptable that they don't turn up. So yeah, if we could chase that, Alison, and give them a good nag. Yes, Councillor Kerr. I
think, Chair, it needs a little bit more than that, to be honest. I think the Chair and Vice Chair ought to contact them as well. I think, you know, we are here as members sitting...
I'm good at nagging, Councillor Bolton, so I'm happy to do that as well.
I think it needs to be stronger than an officer with respect. I think it needs to come from members. They are here to do a job, or they should be here to do a job. How do we know they're doing it if they're never here to tell us? So I really think we ought to be a little bit firm and assertive with them.
Very fair point.
Chair, part of that job is to ensure that we as a committee is working effectively. Is there any way that we can tell whether or not they're actually watching the meeting online?
I shall hand over to you, Don, for that.
I mean, all we can do is ask them, I'm afraid. We can see how many people are viewing, but we can't see which individuals they are, I'm afraid.
I mean, if we want to, I can send them something on behalf of the committee members. You happy with that? Okay. Cool. Are we happy with that? Well, awesome. Okie dokie, right. Item number 5, the Audit and Governance Committee outstanding resolutions. So, yes, Richard, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to run through Appendix 1 quickly with members, the appointment of independent persons to the Audit Governance Committee is on the agenda. The minute extract from the Council, Alstree Hall and Golf Course. You'll see from the progress report we're about 65% through our work on that one. We've got a few more things to do. Once we've finished that, we're going to sit down, as the committee asked, with the independent person, Philip Sunderland, to go through things, to get Philip's independent viewpoint on it, and we'll also discuss it as well with the head of legal, which we tend to do on these type of things, just to make sure we haven't missed anything from a legal basis. Internal audit progress report that's on the agenda. As you can see there, we're going to have an officer, which Nigel Bryan's here from the to update you on the bus station audit, which is mentioned in that report. The recommendation in the CareLink audit, that had been called in by the March meeting, I believe.
Yep.
That's now been implemented, so there's no reason to call that one in anymore. And unfortunately, the head of service that was dealing with the welfare reforms audit has now left the council. So Dom and I are just sourcing another person to come along, hopefully to the next meeting, to update you on what's happening. But they're low risk recommendations.
Right. Okay.
The constitutional working group has been created. Now, Alex has sent me a quick update on that. He doesn't see any merit in taking this to audit and governance at this stage. They're close to launching a second round of the consultation with members from the first draft via a cross-party working group, which he tells me that Councillor Kerr has been included in that one, so and Councillor Bolton, so there will be representation from audit and governance on there. But if those two councillors think it needs to come back to audit and governance, then they can, I'm sure they'll recommend that to us.
Okay, brilliant. Councillor Bolton, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, please, Chair. Item 2. You gave what you're proposing to do about Alistair Hall and Golf Course, but you didn't give us a time. Can we be more definite about it and perhaps have a time limit? Thank you.
Yes, once we're probably another 4 or 5 weeks away from completing everything due to people being on leave. So Martin Shipley, who's going to be reviewing the works, currently on leave. I'll be on leave in August as well, but once we've done that, we'll then sit down with Philip. So hopefully, with our next meeting, I think is the 11th of October, we'll be aiming to bring it to that meeting.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Anything from anybody else? Are we all good? Are we all happy with recommendation 2.1 to track the review and outstanding resolutions and actions in Appendix 1 of the report? Happy? Brill. Awesome. We move on to item 6 then. Contract waivers for the period 1st of January 2023 to the 30th of June 2023. So I shall hand over to Linda.
Thank you, Chair. For those new faces that I don't know, that don't know me, my name's Linda Spivey. I'm the Head of Procurement, and I bring the waiver report to Audit and Accounts. For those, I don't want to teach my grandma to suck eggs, but for a little bit of background, waiver reports, we encourage departments to raise a waiver when they are awarding a contract without doing a process. And so really we're being open and transparent, which is what we need to be, to say, you know, we need to do this, but we've not been able to do a correct process. So we classify waivers in 2 different ways. We classify them as unavoidable, and those are the ones where we have to act urgently to put in place a contract for such as care provision, where obviously it can't wait for us to do a process, and the majority of those excuse me, are for care or special education needs and things that are absolutely urgent that can't wait. But then we have what we call an avoidable waiver, which is where people have failed to plan, basically, and so we've had to put in place a waiver, but they have had, they've been open and transparent in, you know, owning up to say that they've not done it. Yep. So this report has evolved considerably since I first had to write it, and we now do a quarterly comparison so that we've got a comparator and a measure as to our direction of travel. So this report is just for the committee to note, obviously ask any questions that they want to do so. And it shows that we've had a significant drop in the number of waivers that we're reporting. This is for 6 months, so the totals on the first page are actually for 6 months, but it is broken down into quarters on the second page. And as you can see, we have a very low quarter. The last quarter, April to June, has been very low. And then for the avoidable waivers, I produced the Appendix 1, which is for more detail of what those waivers were for. For new members, these are very low value waivers. We can do departmental waivers for up to 100k of current contract procedure rules. And obviously, as you can see, the highest one here is 48,400. So this is, you know, the best it could be, in my opinion and from my experience. Hand over for any questions.
Yes, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of sort of the amount of waivers that you allow, if a particular department's always doing waivers, would that be picked up and would they be spoken to?
Yes, it would be picked up, and the waivers are signed off by directors. So we would not accept or report a waiver that's not signed off by a director. So it would be, and we have in the past, as Richard will agree with me, we've called in directors to answer why we've had multiple waivers. Yes, we do.
Yes, Councillor Kerr.
I'd just like to endorse the fact that this has got a lot better over the last 2-3 years. It's a different sort of report that we get now. There used to be pages of these. My two queries from these are the one regarding the funeral costs, which it comments here that on the whole we're able to do a recharge to the estate of the deceased. And I wondered whether that has become more of a problem recently, and that might be why we've gone over the financial limit for that contract, and whether you have any more information on that. And the second one was regarding the youth offending service contract, as mentioned at the end, case management system renewal. And it seems to have been an oversight that there wasn't an extension available for that, rather than gone beyond an extension, which would show that planning as well. And I just wondered if that was something that was being addressed with the team who are presumably now working on the substantive renewal for that.
Thank you. With regard to the funerals, I wouldn't know if we've managed to claw the money back, because the value of the contract and our monitoring of the contract is actually the value of the invoices we spend. So it's the value to the provider rather than whether or not we've been able to claim back what we've spent. So I'm afraid I can't answer that. It would need to be referred to the service. With regard to the case management system, yes, and definitely an oversight. In our defence, there's been a lot of turnover of staff. I mean, we're carrying loads of vacancies, both in procurement, and there's been a reshuffle with people who are responsible for these contracts. So yes, a complete oversight, but we're doing a lot of work on the procurement pipeline so that we can pick these things up better. And we've done a lot of work to automate the forms and the signs off to get processes moving more quickly.
Thanks for that reassurance.
Brilliant. Cheers, Councillor Kerr. I have a question. I'm not sure whether it's a question that you can answer, Linda, but I'm going to pose it anyway, which is that some of the, well, it feels like the majority of these waivers are because we're not particularly very good at planning. So I suppose my question is, if this is sort of kind of the common denominator, this is the reason why we're having all these waivers, is there like a action plan in place to try and improve the council's planning?
The short answer is yes.
Cool.
And I will use a brief example for you. In the past, we've not added waivers to the contract register.
Yep.
But obviously they are contracts, they're a contract we put in place. But because of the system we were using to produce the contract register, that was produced as a follow-on from a procurement process. As a procurement process didn't exist, they were obviously slipping through the net.
Right.
So we're using our own platform now to produce our contract register, and all waivers are added to the contract register. Okay. So all the automatic reminders and the red flags will appear to say that these need to be, processed properly. Awesome. So yes, we have.
Brilliant. Cheers for that answer, Linda. Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I mean, it's an associated issue, and I recognise that these aren't major contract values, but later on in the agenda we've got a report on fraud investigation where contracts is a major issue in that. So are you confident this is, as you put it, probably down to oversight and not due to any more sinister issues?
I will answer that by saying I am confident that the ones on this report have no sinister issues. But I will assure you that I work very closely with Richard, and if something doesn't smell right, we'll have had a conversation about it before it ever gets a signature or touches a report.
Thank you.
Richard was nodding profusely throughout that. Councillor Wright, so he's clearly in agreement. Right, anything else from anybody else? We all good? Awesome, right. So are we happy then with the recommendation that the committee notes the content of the report and the quarterly comparison of the total number of waivers being in the report? Yep, brilliant, awesome, thank you very much. Thank you for the report, Linda, much appreciated. We'll move on then to item number 7, which is the annual report and review of performance. Let me just get there, which was done by the Head of Strategy, Performance and Partnerships. So who will be presenting?
That's me.
Yes, awesome,
Thank
brilliant.
you.
Cheers, Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you. So just to introduce myself to members of the committee I may not have met before, I'm Sarah Walker. I'm the Head of Strategy, Performance and Partnerships. So I'm going to be covering this report and the risk assurance report, which we'll consider after this. So I know that this report will have already been considered by a number of members of the committee who will have had the opportunity to see it through executive scrutiny. It is a report that is considered by Cabinet as it presents an overview of our performance for the year and our financial spend and income. So in terms of the annual report, we don't have a statutory duty to publish an annual report. We do have to ensure that we make our financial information available in an accessible way, which this report satisfies that requirement. It provides a full overview of key achievements that we've delivered against the commitments we've made as part of our council delivery plan for the year 2022-23. There are 2 appendices with the report. The first one is a summary document which really provides that assessment of progress and impact against each of the themes that we have for the city and have agreed through our partnership activity. And then sitting alongside that Appendix 2 is a more detailed overview of all of the commitments we've made as part of the council delivery plan, both in terms of our priority performance measures, our priority milestones, our priority projects, and also the strategic risks which were in place at the end of the financial year. This report does sit alongside our ongoing quarterly monitoring, which is considered through Cabinet, and our quarterly financial monitoring as well, performance and finance. It will be published on the council website by the end of July, so obviously next week on the 31st. I'm more than happy to take any questions. I think this is a really good opportunity to reflect on things that we've achieved as an organisation and as a city over the last year. Recognising that there have been a lot of challenges and the risks that that we have been facing are documented within Appendix 2, and I'll come on to talk about them a little bit more in the next report. I'm happy to take any questions on either document.
Brilliant. Cheers, Sarah, thank you for that. Do we have any questions? Because I know I've got quite a few. I'll open it to the floor first before I rattle on. Councillor Wright, do you have something you want to add?
Well, just first of all, I take it the report itself is an external facing document for the public. Well, I think that's a really good summary, and I think they ought to be commended for that. External facing, it's very easy to read and give key highlights and promotes the City Council very positively, so thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Anything from anybody? Yes, Councillor Bolton?
Yeah, but what are we doing with the report? I mean, where's it going to go? How is it going to be accessible for the public of Derby? How can the people of Blackreeves, who I represent, read it?
You can get it online, can't you? I'm pretty sure.
And what if they're not online? A lot of my constituents aren't online. It's all right printing these reports, but what happens to them? I know a lot of officer time and council time goes into them, but what happens when they're printed?
Sarah, do you want to come in?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I think that's a really fair and valid question. What I would say is throughout the year, as part of our performance monitoring, we work really closely with our communications team. So a lot of the content of the report will have been features of wider communication activity that's happened throughout the year. So there'll be a lot in there that partners, residents, communities will hopefully recognise in terms of what we share more widely throughout the year. We do publish it on the website, and I fully accept the point around accessibility, and not everybody has access to the website. I think within that context, we've all got a responsibility in terms of taking the content of the report and sharing it. This is the council's annual report, and it's a real opportunity for us to take that and share it locally with our communities. And if there is more information that colleagues would like, more than happy to support that process.
Councillor Bolton?
Would it not be an idea then that this be on the agenda for all our neighbourhood boards, because that's where we have the public attend if they wish to attend, and there's a question time there. I just think, you know, we need to sell ourselves more, not have this document catching dust on a shelf or in a black hole in an email. I just think really we ought to tell the people of Derby what we're doing and the even better things we're going to be doing the next 4 years.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. Just following from Councillor Bolton's, what Councillor Bolton was saying, I'm guessing there's a press release that follows this, and it's on the news feed as well on the website. So obviously the media can report on that report, so they're fully aware.
Yeah, and that was also picked up at Cabinet as well in terms of and executive scrutiny. I suppose that opportunity to share what we're doing, but what I would say is it is something that we ensure we're doing throughout the year. I think that this gives a really nice opportunity to review and reflect and share the positive progress that's being made. Working within performance and improvement, you know, I'm very much what do we need to do better at, but actually this report really does highlight that we continue to deliver a lot for the people of Derby, both as an organisation, but, you know, with our partners as well. There's a lot in here that we deliver collaboratively, and it's a real opportunity to celebrate that. And I think that that's the fact that that's been raised is really pleasing from my perspective. So thank you.
Just to reiterate what Councillor Bolton said earlier on, I think it is quite important that copies are available for people who are not so IT literate as perhaps some of us are here today. And indeed, the neighbourhood board seems a good example of somewhere where are hard copies available of the summary of things, or a few of those? Give them out. Are they available in any public forum anywhere in the country, in the city? Copies presumably are shared with associated businesses around the city as well, Rolls-Royce and Bombardier and so on and so on. I assume that happens, because quite clearly it is important to celebrate, as Sarah said earlier on, to celebrate what the organisation does, to demonstrate the organisation isn't just about a few people sitting in a room talking to themselves. But it is selling the organisation to the outside world, and that's the key information. There's no point in producing a document if it's going to sit on a shelf or sit in a shelf, an IT shelf somewhere. It's pointless. It's expanding it. It's using it all the various available mechanisms to make sure everybody's aware of what's available, what's around.
No, absolutely, totally agree. Sarah, do you want to quickly come in and then? Sorry, that's Sarah. Then I'll come to you, Councillor Bolton, in a second.
Yeah, so we absolutely share it with our partners. We actually had a partnership board last Friday. It was raised at that, and it will be shared following, obviously, publication with our partners alongside all of those minutes. And that's a board that's really well represented of businesses and agencies, partners across the city. I think from a printing perspective, we no longer print out copies. We used to have copies down in receptions and libraries of both this and our council plan. But unfortunately, we don't do that as a standard practice. If there was a request or a need, we'll absolutely ensure that the information is as accessible as it can be. But I think the suggestion around taking it through neighbourhood boards and actually promoting conversations locally, and there's probably an opportunity through some of the locality working that's being undertaken at the moment as well, to really start to think about what this means for our local communities, priorities within local areas, and the areas that we need to progress forward with.
Councillor Kerr.
The way it's laid out still looks as though it's laid out for printing. And I think that, you know, you could see it with a bound copy with a glossy front. But the majority of people who will access it are likely to access it on a smartphone. And I don't think this is terribly accessible for a smartphone. It's quite small. It's sort of laid out too wide. And I just wondered whether any thought had been given to having a smartphone version that would be more acceptable, and how easy it would be to reformat it like that. Some pages I think would be quite easy to do, others might be more challenging. Whether it's worth the effort. Maybe not for this year, but for next year.
I think that's a really good suggestion. We work really closely with the communications team about the format and development of this document. I think our aspiration going forward is to think more innovatively, whilst ensuring that the content and the information is still accessible. It does go through all of the relevant accessibility checks before publication to ensure that, obviously, as a document, it is something that can be accessed by all. I definitely take the point and completely agree about how we share and communicate information, but what I would say is this is a review of the year. It's really important that we're doing that throughout the year, which is what we're trying to do through the kind of regular press activity that links into our performance monitoring. We've got a much better alignment more generally with the commitments we make as part of the council plan, and what communication activity is going out there, which you will see if you go into Derby News. You'll see that the alignment between what we're sharing and what our priorities are.
Any other questions from anybody else before we get them to mine? Awesome, cool. Right, so I have a couple of questions. So the first one is around, so on the delivering our council delivery plan 22-23, it says that 72% of priority measures achieve target. Do we have like a specific target that we want to achieve for like the year? Is it 70%? So are we overachieving? Is it 80%? Are we underachieving? What's the... Do we have one?
So we don't set a target for the total number of performance measures that we would like to hit target.
Yeah.
What I would say is the targets are set on an individual level for each of the performance measures.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work with lead officers in terms of setting realistic targets, and I think that the position we are at presently is representative of that. What I would say to the committee is, having overseen this report for a number of years, is that actually 72% is a really strong performance from where we have been historically. And I'm more than happy to share that information. Obviously, historical reports are also available online and have been considered through the committee, but 72% is certainly the highest percentage that there's been for a period of time.
I think if we could benchmark it against historical data, because I think it'd be quite good if we can articulate and sell the story that in very challenging times, we're actually delivering a lot more than we ever have before, versus less challenging times, so to speak. And then my final point is on some of the data towards the back of the report, where it talks around like each individual line item and whether it's on track or whether there's been some slippage or whatnot. Just a general observation is, for me personally, I think it'd be really good if we could understand, particularly some of those maybe that have had some slippage, why that has occurred and what we're doing to rectify that slippage. So like, what actions do we have in place to make sure that, you know, if something slipped by 6 months, what we're going to do to try and pull some of that back, something like that.
Thank you, and I think that's a really important reflection. What I would say is that we do report on that as part of the quarterly monitoring report.
Yep.
So you will have seen that obviously considered through executive scrutiny and cabinet. I think, was it June that was considered? I can't remember the dates. The dates blur somewhat. So we will present a full overview of where things have either where they're on track or they're not on track, any reasons for slippage, and what the broader context is. There is also more information within our performance monitoring system, Doris, which all colleagues can access, which contains more details around potentially actions that are underway in each of these areas. So as part of performance monitoring activity, we will always go back and look at the alignment between the measures and the milestones and the connectivity and correlation. So what impact is that slippage having in terms of the difference we're making for the city? And also, what does that mean in terms of what further developments do we need to do and work with officers to ensure that that's aligned from a planning perspective? So the recommendation is always we try and feed it back through our business planning process, or it may be in a particular area it's reflected within a risk register as an additional action because a threat has emerged in a particular area. So through the aligned reporting that we do every quarter, we ensure that we get those links in place. We always pick up the actions and progress them forward. And I'm more than happy if any colleagues are not aware of Doris, our performance system, to arrange a training session for you, so you can go in and look at any time that you want to in terms of what information is there.
That'd be great, because as a newbie, I know I'm not particularly all up to speed with everything, so I don't know whether any of the councillors would want to take up an opportunity. Yes, all of us, brilliant, sweet. If we could organise something, Sarah, that'd be great. Yes, Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Kerr.
Because aren't we looking at changing Doris to another system at some point?
Yep, we've had Doris for a while, so as part of our insight-led programme, one of the phases is actually looking at our corporate performance system. We're also looking at risk management as part of that. So that work is in process at the moment. So we are looking at options and development. But in the interim, Doris is a system that is accessible to everybody and that is continued to be used by our colleagues in terms of kind of the oversight and management of performance activity.
Brilliant, cheers for that. Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, I'd very much support an opportunity for all members to opt in for training on Doris. I think that would be very timely, even if it's going to be superseded in a year or two. The other thing I was going to say, in the annual performance results, there's reference there to other documents and other sources of information. I just thought, as it's going to be published predominantly online, could we make put some hot links into that so that people don't need to go searching somewhere else on the website?
Yeah.
Right. Councillor Wright, and then we'll come to Councillor Bolton next.
Yeah, just a couple of observations, really. The first one is more general. This sort of information, performance information, isn't really accessible to residents of Derby, is it? I've looked at the website and I couldn't really see a capability to analyse the performance of in a range of areas. So that's my first question. Am I missing something, or is that something we're going to be doing? And the second observation really is this list of all of the risks, etc., is 2 or 3 pages worth. And I take your point that this is looked at by Cabinet and by Finance and Performance. And I guess our role is to make sure that there's no gaps or errors in judgment in terms of, and I find there's a lot of these elements that I think when I looked at last time, they're still red, you know, and cybersecurity is one, and we're going to come back to that later in the meeting. It really is how do we make sense of all that, I think, is my question, and make it easier rather than scroll, because it's very, very difficult to, you know, if I take a couple of examples, one of them's around rough sleepers and the numbers of those, that looks like a quite small change, and it's very difficult to assess whether that's a big issue we need to be thinking about more or less. Now, I'll take some reassurance you say this is considered in others, and there's other performance measures where, again, the difference in the performance is very difficult to assess whether that is a major cause for concern, even though it's red, because there's a lot of reds in the report as well, if you understand what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. Okay, so from a external perspective, we obviously the performance reports are published as part of Cabinet papers, so that everything is accessible online. We also have a number of different data sets that we publish online through Info for Derby that will provide information around identified need or potential areas for consideration at different levels. So some of that goes down to ward level. I think the thing that we need to seek to do from a performance perspective is how we make this meaningful in terms of the difference that it's making. So the services that we're delivering as an organisation, how do we communicate that and understand the difference that that makes in exactly the context that you're talking about? Which is one of the things that this document tries to do. I think we've also got to consider from a performance perspective how the period of time over which things need to change, and sometimes we recognise that it's quite actually sustained gradual improvement is probably more of a preferred outcome than performance that's dipping up and down quite regularly. So we need to think about how we communicate that in terms of understanding the broader context of the difference that we're making. So we do put information out there. There's always room for improvement. I think there's always more that we can do in terms of making the information accessible and available, and I'll definitely take that away from a performance perspective to reflect on and think about. In terms of the comment on the risk side of things and the REDs, what I would say is that some of those, we'll come on to talk about the risk report in a moment, is that we do a lot of work to understand where the threat level is, the impact of our controls and mitigations, and in some areas it may be that that threat level remains at a certain position. What we do is connect really closely with our internal audit colleagues so that actually the audit programme is focused around seeking assurances around the adequacy of controls and mitigations, despite the fact there may be red risks. We also, on a regular basis, go back to, so if a risk rating has not changed for a period of time, despite the controls that are in place, we will go back to risk owners, understand that, has the risk context changed, what is the impact of the controls and mitigations to get underneath that. So what I would say, particularly on the risk side of things, the red is not necessarily always, it's not a good thing because they are threats to us as an organisation or us as a city, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not activity or mitigations and controls in place that we've got assurances around the adequacy on.
Brilliant. Cheers for that answer. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just follow up? The external performance monitoring aspect, if you look at some London councils, for example, as a resident, you can go online and not only see the data, but you can actually interrogate it and look at trends and etc. Have you got any plans to do that in Derby? Because it seems a much better way of communicating to the public the council's performance.
Councillor Wright, do you have an example from London? Because I know there's 32 boroughs, I think, in London, so
yeah,
a specific example.
I'm pretty sure Camden is one of the ones, and I'm pretty sure Ealing as well. But I mean, it's not just if you go to, for example, in the US, most municipal councils at a state, local level have got this as routine. Have been doing it for years and years.
Yeah, so we do have, Info for Derby does some of that. I think from a broader perspective, it's something we will look at as part of the refresh of the performance management system. And obviously some services do publish their information externally as well. So I think, yeah, I'm more than happy to pick that up and reflect on it as a development of the system going forward, and more broadly speaking, how we're making the information accessible. So thank you.
Councillor Bolton, did you want something more down?
Yeah, just a practical point, really. While we were talking about Doris, and I think I'd appreciate an update on how the workings of Doris. I know the councillors have a development evening every month. So perhaps that could be on the agenda, if Don can take that back to member services. We could have that available for every councillor, if they wish to take part, to have Doris as an item on one of those evenings. Thank you.
Awesome. Cheers, Councillor Bolton. That's a good suggestion. Right, any more questions? Because I'm just looking at the clock. So are we all happy to move the recommendation to note the annual report and annual review of performance? Happy with that? All of us? Brilliant. Cool. Fantastic. Thank you for that report, Sarah. Much appreciated. So we'll move on to item 8, which is the 2022-23 year-end risk assurance report, which I think you're also presenting, Sarah.
I am, Chair. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
So this report should be considered alongside, so the committee receives 2 reports a year on risk assurance. One in January and one in July. So you've got your mid-year position and your year-end position. This report is intended to be considered alongside, and I fully recognise we've got lots of new members of the committee. There are some longer standing members that will have seen the mid-year position. It is obviously referenced within the report, but it is something that we provide as a comprehensive assessment of our risk assurance environment. So this report provides the committee with an overview of activity that the assurance team and broader colleagues through mechanisms such as our corporate risk management group have undertaken over the 6-month period ending March 2023 in relation to our strategic risks. So as part of our risk management framework, obviously there are a number of different themes that we have identified within our strategy and handbook that we seek to further develop on an ongoing basis. So presented within paragraph 4.5 is a summary of those themes. Now, this report is probably slightly different to some of those that we have presented previously in that the updated risk management strategy and handbook was presented to the committee in March, which is where you will see a lot of those actions that we were going to progress forward were completed alongside the publication of that updated document. So there are obviously a number of areas that we need to seek to continue to develop, predominantly in relation to risk identification, ensuring that we are providing the frameworks and facilities for risks to be identified at all levels, particularly through strategic planning. So the risk management strategy and handbook are both available on My Derby, as is the latest full strategic risk register. So this report obviously provides an overview of the work that has been completed in the implementation of our strategy and handbook, which is a summary you've got presented in 4.5, and also provide the committee with an overview of assurances on our strategic risk register. So a number of years ago, just in terms of providing that broader context, the committee used to receive the full strategic risk register on a regular basis. Actually, in keeping with the role of the committee, this moved and matured as our risk culture matured to focus us on the assurances with the mitigations, identification, analysis of our strategic risks. So presented within Appendix 1 is a summary of all of the strategic risks as they were at the end of March 2023. Now, what I would say, and the reason for flagging that this report should be considered alongside the mid-year report, is in the mid-year position you get a much fuller picture of each of the strategic risks. So you will receive an overview of any external activity that may have happened in the area of risk, any internal activity that may have happened in the area of risk, alongside work that we will do locally through the assurance team to ensure that the risk is adequately being monitored and mitigating the threats or maximising the opportunities that may be in place. So as this is the year-end position, it is a summary table that colleagues have got as opposed to the full detail. Yep. And the mid-year report is obviously available in the previous committee papers. But what you have is an overview of all of the strategic risks, the score as it was at the end of the year, changes that may have happened in the last 6 months, so that obviously you can see how the risk journey has progressed positively or negatively, and an overview of assurance activity that has been carried out alongside each of the strategic risks. What I would say is we have significantly improved the volume of activity that we do in relation to assurance of risk. As I've said, the audit programme is very much aligned to the risk framework. The assurance team within my service do a lot of work through quarterly monitoring, but also outside of quarterly monitoring, to actually get underneath the risks, making sure they're defined appropriately, making sure the controls are in place and that we're monitoring that they remain in place, and where appropriate that further action is taken to mitigate risks in these areas. We have identified a number of risk areas where we would like to do more activity, and they are presented in paragraph 4.19. where we have already, in a number of instances, actually commenced work with risk owners. And what we're getting to the position of is actually, rather than focusing on a specific risk, we're doing a lot more work around cross-cutting risk themes, and accommodation sufficiency is a really good example of that, and quite topical given some of the, obviously, latest news activity around housing more generally that is out there at the moment. So we're absolutely working with lead officers to focus on that in line with development activity. Based on the work that we've done as part of not just the development and issuing of this report, but what we do as part of our ongoing assurance activity, we've not identified any areas for consideration through a risk surgery. We feel that there are appropriate assurances in place for all of our strategic risks in line with the work that obviously internal audit do. In terms of priorities from a risk management perspective going forward, obviously the report that was presented to the committee as it was in March provided an overview of our updated strategy and handbook. The key area we would like to focus on over the next year is training. So there will be some training scheduled for members of the committee, and we'd like to actually extend that broader than the committee as well. And also risk appetite in terms of how the statements that we agreed as part of that handbook and strategy start to shape decision making, recognising that we are in a really dynamic context as an organisation. We cannot eliminate all risks, and nor should we. And actually, we've absolutely got to be making informed and evidence-based decisions, recognising that we have to take risk in some areas or tolerate risk in other areas. I'm really happy to take any questions on either the covering report or the appendices.
Questions? Yes, Philip.
Just a slightly more detailed question. On 4.9, you indicate 4 bullet points of areas for which you're going to do further work on, basically. Yeah. I was really looking at the housing one, because the City Council can't do the housing one in isolation without liaising with neighbouring authorities, because of the nature of the City Council's area, in that, you know, there isn't a lot of spare space around the edge of the city to develop it. Neighbouring authorities, one of which doesn't have any sort of housing action plan at all, it's fairly fluid about what sort of housing can be built in that particular area. But the impact of housing being developed outside the city's boundary has clear implications on the services provided by the City Council.
Yeah, absolutely.
Social services, particularly education, because developers are saying, I do school appeals, and so I come across this quite a lot. People will turn up appeals and say, well, our nearest school is X. And developers told me that my nearest school is X school. And yes, it is the nearest school. However, they live in the county council, and it's not their normal school. You can't do a review of housing within the city without liaising with everybody around all the things. How do you bring in all the bits and pieces for them? Because it's not an easy task, I would suggest.
That's a really good question.
And it's going to vary very much between authority, well, Amber Valley, South Derbyshire, whatever, whichever authority it is. It's going to vary very much from one authority to another, whether they've got their own housing action plan or not. Because, as I say, Amber Valley don't have one. They've never had one for 12 years, as I understand it. So, you know, it's just a thought, really. I don't know how you get around that one. Sarah,
yeah.
sorry.
So, yes, Sarah.
Thank you. I think that's a really good question. What I would say is this area of threat is looking at sufficiency of accommodation across, in its broadest sense. So it's not just looking around sufficiency of properties, it's looking at sufficiency of certain types of properties, whether that's for from a supported living perspective, whether that's placements for our looked after children. I think the point around neighbouring authorities is probably something that has happened through conversations around devolution activity. So that is obviously one of the benefits that can come through that activity. We have engaged representatives as part of the review of this area of risk from both within the, obviously the council, also Derby Homes have been engaged. and they have connections in with neighbouring authorities. So we are working and seeking to do as much collaboration as we can within this space, recognising that there are always challenges, particularly when all areas are working to their own priorities. What I would say is this is so that we've introduced this as a strategic risk from Q1 onwards. It's an area of ongoing work, and I think it's something that we will need to continually focus on. So there'll be opportunities to further consider going forward, as it will be detailed within the strategic risk register, but absolutely colleagues across from the housing perspective are connecting with colleagues in other areas.
Awesome. Brilliant. Cheers for that response, Sarah, because I think that's actually that point that Philip raised is probably affects nearly every single one of us, particularly Councillor Bowen and Councillor Kerr, because I know that you've got a lot of bolt-on communities in little old random Blaygreaves. Yes, Councillor Kerr.
The issue of school availability and school places is certainly a fairly critical one. But what's interesting about my reading of that bullet point is the reference to the phrase statutory housing duties, which I think are related to specifically our duty to provide accommodation for people who will otherwise are homeless or about to be homeless. And that's much narrower, and it's not a requirement to ensure that there's a home for everybody who can afford to be living somewhere because they want a job and so on. It's the people who are most vulnerable. And as we've been assured, there is work going on about this. It's a smaller cohort of people, but still very challenging.
Yes,
I think my point was, yes, I accept that, Lucy, but it is wider than just focusing on specific needs. It's the whole provision of housing to all groups. You know, people who live here, people who don't live here, people who move in there, people who are on sort of asylum register, all sorts of things. It's the whole thing. So yes, you're right, Lucy. But I think it needs to widen out to look at everybody's the implication for all needs in the housing area. That was where I was coming from, really.
I think Sarah wants to just quickly come in.
Okay, so we are looking more broadly with this risk. So we do have across both Derby City and Derby Homes, there are identified areas of risk in relation to particular cohorts and particular identified needs. One of the reasons for this deep dive review is recognising the interdependencies between the different areas, and also that the context within which not just us as a council are operating, but other local areas is incredibly challenging from a housing perspective. So we actually had a discussion around this at our partnership board again at the end of last week in terms of the overall context and challenges, both from a vulnerability perspective, so those families that may be approaching us as homeless, or individuals, those individuals that may be sleeping rough, right through to the other spectrum of affordable housing, sufficiency of housing. So the intent behind this was to try and get that really strategic overview of the position that we're in. And it's an evolving landscape, and there will always be more work that we need to do. But from the committee's perspective, just to provide assurances, there are targeted risks in key areas. So you will see a link with other risks that are contained within our strategic risk register or our service risk registers alongside some of our partner areas. So this is intended to give us that real opportunity to have those high-level conversations. What I would say, though, is the context is incredibly challenging. And that's nationally reported around the private rented sector, around affordable housing, around homelessness. So I think that actually we are in the right space having these conversations, and absolutely there is that commitment from professionals across the board. But I think we need to recognise that opportunities to mitigate are always going to be really challenging within this context.
Brilliant. Cheers, sir. Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, it was just a very general question. I'm guessing you're just using a standard to calculate the risk, just a standard risk matrix, which is standard, and to look at the impact and probability, is that basically?
So I'm more than happy to share it with the committee. Apologies that it's not attached to this as an appendices, but yes, so we use a 4x4 risk matrix. We've got both, so it's not just a threat matrix, we've got an opportunity matrix that sits alongside it. So all of the details of that are either available on My Derby, or if you go into the committee reports as they were in March, it's all published as part of the strategy and handbook. That was all updated a number of years ago when we did a refresh of our risk management approach, just a standard one. And all of the criteria are contained in there as well. So if you wanted to understand a little bit more around obviously what hits the four kind of category, either on impact or likelihood, then you can go and have a look. But there is all that detail there. What we also look at from a risk perspective is we try to look at it through the opportunity and the threat. So we will look at what's the worst case, what's the best case. Are there any things that we can identify from what potentially this area of threat that we can flip it, so we can change that narrative as well and seek the opportunities alongside that.
Councillor Wright, do you want to?
Yeah, can I ask a question about strategic risk 14? This appears to be a financial and reputational risk, which I can understand the mitigation for, but is there a specific, you talked about specific risks in other areas, so recorded elsewhere. I would have thought associated with this is a risk to the long-term operational capability of the city to manage waste that's associated with this. So am I right in understanding there's probably a risk that's probably read there somewhere else, but it's not considered a corporate risk?
Yep, so obviously as part of this report we only identify those at a strategic level. So there are risks that are set out at a directorate and a departmental level as well. And I would recommend that councillors, if they want more information around particular service risks, obviously liaising with those service leads to get that local narrative, but we're also happy to assist in that process as well.
Brilliant. Cheers, Sarah. Yeah, because I'm not sure if this is a question that I'm about to ask you, Sarah, whether it's just a general observation, but we've got, oh boy, do we have some whoppers in here, is the polite way of describing them, I think. And then we've got quite a hefty amount of medium ones as well. So not beating about the bush, we're a little bit like old Mother Hubbard, you know, the cupboard's are bare. What is the probability of a lot of these major risks and the medium ones sort of almost creating like a perfect storm and occurring all at the same time? So I'm looking at some of the figures here, you know, and this is enough to give me a sleepless night, to put it politely.
And actually, that's one of the questions we ask about risk identification. What keeps you awake at night? So this is obviously what keeps you awake at night. I mean, the reality is, I think the context that we've been living in for the last few years is really evidence of the fact that we need to be agile in our response to risk. What I can say to the committee is the work that we do with risk owners and that risk owners do in terms of trying to ensure that the controls in place, that the mitigations are in place, I think has moved on significantly. Yeah. That's not to say that there won't be a perfect storm where the risks may be realised in a number of different areas at the same time, but there is a significant amount of work to reduce the likelihood of that and be really realistic. I think on the other side of that, we do have to recognise that some of the risks that we've got as an organisation are also presenting as issues at the moment as well. And there is a distinct difference between them presenting as an issue and as a threat, but we do have to recognise that they do sit side by side in some areas. Yeah. And actually the work that we've been doing as an organisation is really trying to get underneath management of the issue and mitigation of the future risk, because they can coexist. And I think that's where some of the complexity may come in terms of that perfect storm.
Brilliant. Okay, awesome. And my final question, Sarah, is around, for these risks, do we have almost like so I'd call it like a risk burn down chart, so you can see when your mitigation is sort of taking effect and then how the probability or the impact of the risk drops, so you can sort of visually see it. Does the council do anything like that? Because if we do, I think it'd be great for, well, I know I would appreciate myself to kind of understand visually and quickly you know, when our risks are going to be burning down, when it will be done by, and just sort of see how it all how they all layer together.
So we don't have any charts in the way that you're describing them.
Yep.
Obviously, for each of the risks, we've got a really detailed overview of what the controls and mitigations are, when we anticipate that they'll be implemented by, therefore what the potential impact would be in terms of our, I suppose, control environment and level of threat. More than happy to have a conversation about that going forward. I think what I would say is our overall risk maturity has moved on, and hopefully members of the committee who have been on this journey with me will agree with me, has moved on significantly over probably the last 5 years. I think the conversations we're having are really different. What I would say is, particularly from the perspective of what you're describing, the context within which the risks are existing makes it quite challenging for some of these strategic risks, recognising, you know, I can see Alison in front of me, so I'll pick up on the financial ones just because that's easy. You know, the context of some of these are really challenging, and actually we may be able to implement the actions, but actually having that longer term impact in terms of the threat scores is something that can be quite challenging on some of these. It's easier in some other areas of risk that we've got. But I'm more than happy to look at that, and I think anything that makes risk accessible, makes it meaningful, and we can demonstrate the impact of our control environment is really positive.
Do you other councillors think that would be beneficial than what I've suggested, or do you think I'm talking rubbish?
Just to reiterate what Sarah says, I mean, having been on the committee for a number of years, it has the whole risk appetite, the whole risk explanation, the whole understanding of risk has matured amazingly in that period. And I think Lucy would probably agree with me. It's light years away from where we were. Well, you weren't 5 years ago, I would suggest. I'm just wondering if at some stage some sort of training session or part of a training for the members might be helpful to explain how the whole thing developed, because I say it'd be useful refresher for myself certainly, and some of the other members who are newer to the thing would perhaps understand the whole process of how it developed from Blankman, and even to explain what a risk surgery is, for instance, mentioned in there. I noticed nobody's queried that, but that is something we have occasionally had. And it had proved quite useful, from my point of view anyway, if not from Sarah's point of view. So just a suggestion. Really.
Okay, awesome, fantastic. Well, we'll have a discussion offline, Sarah. I think that'd be great. So if anybody has no further questions, are we happy with recommendation 2.1 and 2.2? So obviously, note the progress made from the mid-year position on assurance assessments for each stage of risk management process presented in paragraph 4.5. And 2.2, to note the latest assurance overview completed on risks within the Strategic Risk Register, Appendix 1. You happy with all that? Brilliant, awesome. Thank you very much. Right, we will move on to item number 9, which is the appointment of independent persons to the Audit and Governance Committee. So, Richard, are we...
It will be me, Chair, yes.
Smashing.
As Alex isn't here, but both Alison and Dom have been working with Alex and myself on this one as well. So there's 3 of us here that can.
Fantastic,
deal
brilliant.
with this one.
He's gone. We can talk.
He's gone. Yes, appointment of co-opted members of the Audit and Governance Committee. As you're aware, we have 2 co-opted members at the moment, although you've only seen one of them. I mean, Councillor Kerr will be aware of the other one. I mean, unfortunately, they're not able to make it as often because of where they're based.
Yeah.
We thought it was time to, the committee thought it was time to review the position on this anyway. And so Alex and Dom sought to put an advert out. We had a much better response this time than we had previously, which was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, the whole way of co-opted members now on audit and governance committees is taking off. I mean, those of you that attended the induction course will have heard me wax lyrically about co-opted members. It's something that I'm very, very keen on. I'm keen on audit committees as well. I mean, audit committees aren't mandatory in local government, and neither are co-opted members. A lot of local authorities are now seeing the benefit of co-opted members. I know this committee has definitely seen the benefit of having Philip over the last 4 years, particularly when it comes to dealing with external audit. So, but Philip's knowledge from being working for District Audit, has covered a lot of spheres, and it's been very, very useful for this committee. We've been very, very fortunate with the responses we've got, as you can see from the report. It covers a lot of the bases that we've got. I mean, the four of us were a bit stumped, really, as to how we would recommend just one person for this. So for the committee's benefit, the four of us did meet with the chair and vice chair last week to go through our understanding of what we thought and see if they were in agreement with what we're putting forward. So as you can see from the report, the three people plus Philip that we're recommending have all will bring different strengths to this. They've all got a different background, all something that's really crucial, if I'm honest, to the functioning of an audit committee. So without more to say, really, it's what we're basically recommending is that the committee consider actually appointing another three. It doesn't seem a great deal. I mean, when you think there are local authorities out there who've got 4 or 5 property members. Absolutely. So it's not overkill, and they'll all bring something different.
Yes, Councillor Kerr.
I'm very happy with that first recommendation. I agree that they all bring something to the table, to the chamber. The additional cost, I don't think is going to break the budget. It's not flagged up here as a significant thing apart from the cost, the small allowance they get. But what I would query is whether it actually makes sense to appoint them all the same term, because we've had the situation this year where there only are 2 of us who follow through from last year. If we appoint everybody for a 4-year term, it'll happen at the same time as the elections. And potentially, if they didn't put themselves forward again and we were doing a selection and people here changed, we could end up with a complete change of who's sitting on this committee. And I think that some continuity would be helpful. So I would suggest that we co-opt 2 for 2 years and the other for 4 years, but it could be done 1 every year. And I've got no preference for how we would split that, but happy to sort of take advice on that as a principle.
That's right. So we spoke about that last week, so I'll let Richard just sort of explain our thinking behind that.
Thank you. I mean, the reason that we went for it, I mean, you've already pointed that out previously, it was ties in with the electoral cycle, and that's one reason we do that. But the point you're raising is a very, very good one, as we have found this time. With only yourself and Philip remaining from them, we could have a situation where if the North Force doesn't then stand, we have a brand new committee, we'll have no one in 4 years' time, 5 years' time with experience of it. I'm not sure if Dom or Alison have got any views on that.
I think there's probably pros and cons for it, really. I think probably the likelihood of that happening, it's not totally 100% that there will be a 100% turnover of the audit committee, and I suppose it's balancing that risk off with actually losing what skills you could bring to the table straight away by appointing all 3 of them. So I just think there's pros and cons of it, really.
So I think we can appoint them all now, but for different tenures, in the same way as when you had when we had elections by thirds. If you had a by-election, somebody would be elected for the remaining period of somebody, and the other one would get 4 years. So in the same way, we would have everybody starting now, but 2 for 2 years and 2 for 4 years. And after 2 years, we would re-advertise, ask people to come forward, fill those 2 places. Those 2 people could reapply, and they would then be on a rolling 4-year cycle.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think I understand what you're saying, Councillor Kerr, but I think the risk of all 4 of them jumping ship at the end of their 4-year tenure is quite minimal, quite low. But I get your point to break it up.
So this is an ongoing situation. Yeah. So in perpetuity, it would mean that we would have the security of a rolling system. So it wouldn't necessarily just be this next 4-year period. But in 8 years, 12 years, 16 years' time, we would still have that security of having a rolling process.
What does everybody else think? Councillor Wright, you look like your cogs are working away in your head.
Yeah, it's that obvious, is it? I mean, looking at the background, they'll all look very well you know, experienced and knowledgeable in their area, and it looks as though it's incredibly good value for money in terms of the cost. My only concern really is not about the continuity, it's about having potentially 4 experts here and us getting just into a technical, and I might mean that in a, you know, a technical conversation rather than how this, you know, impacts on our residents and etc., and getting too engaged in that and being overcome by. I mean, some of these reports are very, very challenging to actually, you know, as a relative layperson, to actually go through and pick out what we really need to be, and then getting engaged in the minutiae of how an external audit works and things like that. That would be my only concern, but you know, this is one of the areas where I would bow to the expertise of, you know, the people who know more about this than me.
Yeah, I think, Councillor Wright, you're absolutely right, and that was one of our considerations in terms of our recommendations as well, in terms of the balance of the committee. We did talk to the Chair and Vice Chair about that, and I think well, they sort of felt comfortable that through their ability to chair the meeting, they could, you know, retain that balance by effective chairing to ensure that the voice of the member was still a prominent voice of the committee.
Don't worry, I'll still let you speak, John, don't worry. But just to kind of reiterate what Richard and Alison have previously said, you know, we spoke with Alison, Richard and Dom and Alex last week. The 3 additional members are extremely qualified. And just for transparency, obviously there's an allowance of £1,215 for each of them, but that's well within our budget. So, you know, I think it's a slam dunk for us. I think having additional independent oversight and overview of all the stuff that we discuss on this committee will be massively beneficial. Not just to the work that we do on this committee, but also, I think, to the city as well, to the council. So I'm proper keen on this. I understand some of the concerns that have been raised today, but I think, you know, let's get on with it. Let's get them here. Let's get them working. And because they, with their experience in, you know, they might pick up on something that we've missed, and it could be something really crucial. So, you know, I'm thinking crack on with the recommendation and get them here. Everybody happy with that? We all good? Right, so recommendation 2.1 to request that the full council approve the appointment of Philip Sunderland, Paul Stone, David Webster and Anthony Dolman as co-opted members to the Audit and Governance Committee for 4-year terms expiring on the 18th of May 2027.
I still have problems with the tenures, and I think we should stagger them.
Okay. What does everybody, Councillor Cuss, John Wright, Councillor Wilson, what do we think? I have no problem with the 4-year term. I understand Councillor Kerr's concerns, but obviously other members of the committee.
Yeah, I agree with the recommendation for the reasons that were stated.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a shame that obviously it would be better if it's more gender balanced as well, but obviously.
Are you trying to say they're pale, male and stale, Councillor Kerr? They're pale and male, unfortunately. We can't have everything, unfortunately. Okay. Is it worth considering staggering it if we can? If they're open to it? Valid point. So if we sort of tweak the recommendation slightly to have 2 for 2 years and 2 for 4 years, are we happy with that? Can we do that? Yeah. Awesome. Thumbs up. Brilliant. Cool. Okay, yeah, I will get advice from our fantastic officers on that. Pass the buck. Okay, awesome. Does someone need to go and grab Philip now to tell him that he can come back in? Otherwise, he'll just be out there for the rest of the session, bless him. Awesome. So what we'll do is we'll obviously move on to item number 10. Oh, he's there, sweet, brilliant. The Counter Fraud Annual Report for 2022-2023, which let me get to that page exactly. Who is presenting the...
It's me again.
Richard again, fantastic.
Firstly, apologies if anyone's got printed copies. I don't know, Dom, we had to change. Somehow we discovered that when we were briefing the chair that a paragraph had fallen out, a crucial paragraph in my opinion, because it's on fraud risk, which is one of my key areas of enjoyment, shall we say, for doing. But we've put that back in for those online, but apologies for that. But the Counter Fraud Annual Report, in line really with the risk management report, we bring a half-yearly counter fraud report to committee, and then this is the final report pulling in 22-23. We cover quite a lot of areas in there. I end up always being the spokesman for this, and Councillor Kerr and Philip will recall that committee did say that they didn't want me purely, just me purely involved in the fraud side of things, and others had to be others involved. They wanted the independence of the head of internal audit around fraud as well. So it's not just me that writes this report. There are several people involved in this, but I'm just the spokesman, so I may not be able to field all the answers to any questions on certain areas. But just to run through it with you, we pick up at the National Fraud Initiative. For those that are not aware, the National Fraud Initiative started way back in 1996 as an idea. It wasn't mandatory in 1996. And basically, it's a data matching exercise across local authorities, and it's developed over the years. In 1998, there was the Audit Commission Act, which made it mandatory. And I'm sure Philip will correct me if I've got these things wrong. But it was made to, it became part of the external audit as well at that particular point in time. So all local authorities have to participate in it. It's now moved, with the unfortunate demise of the Audit Commission, to the Cabinet Office. So the Cabinet Office now oversee this. As the report takes you through the 2021 NFI matches exercise and what happened there, and details what we found, and also gives you some outline on the current NFI exercise 22-23 that's been ongoing since January, and the figures are all in the reports there. Again, it's something, as the head of audit for Derby City Council, my role really is just to oversee all of this. Individual officers through all departments in these areas will be picking up the matches in there. It is quite an onerous exercise if you think about the fact that they've got full-time jobs and then suddenly along come all these data matches. The Cabinet Office are cracking the whip, chasing up, saying, why haven't you matched this yet? Why are you doing about this? Other authorities are contacting you, and it is it's a very interesting area. One thing we try to do at Derby is be ahead of that, and we try. Part of our audit work is to do a lot of data matching as well. We use data analytics and data matching, try and keep ahead of this thing. Because if you think about it, this exercise for 2023 is a snapshot as at October 22. That's when the data was all sent to the Cabinet Office for them to then crunch it into their systems. Yep. So it is a snapshot. So that's really around NFI. The next area is around the counter fraud team. And you can see from section 4, it says the counter fraud team consists of 4.4 FTEs. One thing I will say is the counter fraud team has to be self-financing. So their job is to find fraud, and the amount of fraud they find finances their work. It says here is based within revenues, benefits and exchequer services, which it was for 22-23. Reporting that head of service reported through to Alison. With the management restructure, the revenues, benefits and exchequer services now no longer exists. It's gone into one much bigger customer service, and the fraud team, counter fraud team, now reports through to me, so I oversee their work. So it adds to internal audit, because we do, and one thing I've always said to the committee is we do a lot of work with the counter fraud team. Audit has their responsibility for fraud. Counter fraud team has responsibility for fraud. It makes sense for the two to be joined together. The other thing as well is the counter fraud team at Derby also does work for Derby Homes and for South Derbyshire as well. And the housing revenue account supports a couple of the posts in there, and South Derbyshire also put money into one of the posts in that section. And both Derby Homes and South Derbyshire are partners within the Central Midlands Audit Partnership, of which I'm the head of the partnership. So again, and one of the things that I can do as well is look at how we can expand the counter-fraud team to actually help other partners as well. And that's one of the things we're working on at the moment. Can we get more counter-fraud experts in and sell their services to other partners within CMAP as well? The work that the counter-fraud team is detailed there for you in the report. I won't go through all of that, together with their savings breakdown for 22-23. They are pretty reactive at the moment, if you can imagine. I think last year they had 333 fraud referrals coming through. For 4.4 people to try and do 333 referrals is a lot of work. Yeah. And there is a backlog. They are doing their best to keep up with things, but the work they do find, they are a very, very effective unit. Counter-fraud policy, Councillor Kerr and Philip will remember that before we used to have individual policies, and we tried back in January 2022 to put it all into one policy, so it made part of really a counter-fraud, bribery and corruption policy and framework. And that was approved by this committee back in January 2022, and we've not made any amendments to that date. So, which brings us on to section 6 and the overall approach to fraud risk. This is something that I've get quite excited about. I have to admit that. One of the things that did worry me, that the council's strategic risk register a couple of years ago had no mention of fraud on there. And looking through the departmental risks, I could find no mention of fraud. This worried me somewhat.
Yep. Understandable.
I sit on the corporate risk management group, did a lot of liaison with Sarah Walker and her team, and it was agreed that we needed a strategic risk around fraud. So we had one that, as you see there, fraudulent activity within the organisation, which when I started thinking about it, issues really from my point of view is there are so many different types of fraud. There's internal fraud for the council and there's external fraud as well. So looking at that, we then developed it into two separate risks for an internal and external fraud. The corporate risk management group has now decided, that it would de-escalate the two fraud risks down to departmental level, which I've got no problem with. As long as someone's looking at fraud risks, I've got no issues with it, as long as I can see that something's happening. And you'll see as well from there that there are a lot of controls around fraud risks. Some are working, some are not. And my biggest concern is that, at the moment, we haven't got the resources to do proper fraud risk training and awareness across the council. We can do pockets of it, and we do pockets of it. But, ideally, we'd like to find some way of doing it across the council. And that's something that the senior investigator and myself are looking at the moment, is how we can roll that one out. We've done training for this committee in the past, and that's gone down quite. For some unknown reason, people enjoy counter-fraud training. I used to do it as students and stuff like that, and they'd sit through the boring stuff I do on accountancy and all that. Mention fraud, everyone perks up, and it's one of those things that does get people's attention.
Because it's like being a detective. It's like a game of Cluedo. Who done it?
It is. So we've now got this down at departmental level, and what I'm doing with my audit staff is we are looking at how people are monitoring fraud risk. Ideally, I'd like the council to do a complete fraud risk assessment. Where are all its fraud risks? Yep. Have we picked them all up? I do one as part of the internal audit planning, but it's all right me saying to Alison, who's got overall responsibility as Section 151 officer for counter fraud, here's my fraud risk assessment, but that's coming from an audit point of view. There is a council point of view as well, and that's something we need to have a look at. We are doing a lot of work around it, and I've got some staff doing work around the counter fraud framework, and I say that in there, and that's really going to shape the counter fraud policy going forward. We'll feed into all of that and say, what we're finding is this, that, and the other. Perhaps we need to just tweak the policy and the framework in this way. So that's again is something that we're going to be working on again in 23-24 as well. Money laundering. We had no reports of money laundering in 22-23. Same with bribery. So Public Interest Disclosure Act, I have to be careful with how, because we're in public session, that I don't want to be identifying individuals through this. So hence why you get a bit of a bland outlook. But what it's basically saying is, what it's showing is the whistleblowing is working. We are investigating things are being found. So it's really just to give the committee assurance that whistleblowing is working within the authority, and it is being taken seriously. Again, the new whistleblowing policy was brought to committee in January 2023. So there's one or two little tweaks made to it, but now that's being developed further. And one of the main reasons for tweaking the report was to look at the reporting process for whistleblowing, which is now ultimately to the monitoring officer. So that's the new whistleblowing policy is available and is working well. The last thing on this report is Regulation of Investigative Powers Act, or RIPA. And again, surprisingly enough, we've not had any applications for directed surveillance or covert human intelligence sources as part 2 of the RIPA Act in 2022-23. And that's really all I've got to say about the report, just taking you through that. If there are any questions, I'll try my hardest to answer them.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that in-depth walkthrough, and also thank you for the report. It's really good. Brilliant. Show of hands, fantastic. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Richard, just picking up from what you said about the training across the council. So you're saying there isn't a mandatory training module. It's strange because my organisation I work for, we have a mandatory e-training for fraud awareness. So maybe a recommendation would be that I'd recommend it.
Pick up on that as well. Again, same thing in my organisation. With my day role, we have a e-learning mandatory. Everybody must do it. So I'm wondering is there something here that we could do, online learning for an hour, 2 hours, however long it needs to be, to get everybody on the council on fraud training?
Certainly something I'd support. Certainly something perhaps Alison and myself need to take away, talk about, because there will be a cost to that.
Brilliant.
I mean, as you're aware, we do it with the GDPR, and for my role, I will always stand up and say, well, fraud is equally as it's happening. The amount of fraud, I mean, you can see from the socio-economic aspects I've put in the covering report, it's a vast area.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know what the actual amount of fraud in the public sector. People guess at it, there's a figure, but there's so many unknowns.
Yeah. So is everybody supportive of that recommendation to explore some form of e-learning mandatory training for everybody on the council, including councillors? Brilliant. Awesome. I'll go to Councillor Wright first, then we'll come to you, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, I mean, the first comment is it's really pleasing to see this sort of report to the Audit Committee. Something that I'm interested in. I've got 3 questions though. Your comment on suspicious activity report, I found it very surprising that you haven't received any suspicious activity reports in relation to council business, and I wonder whether that's because there's some issue at the other end in terms of the issuing authority of the suspicious activity report and they're not getting through. So I'd be grateful for your answer on that. My second question is in relation to your bigger picture about the scale of the problem. Looking at the figures, in terms of cash, 286,000 out of a revenue budget around 260 million, 0.1%. Is there an ability to go to a comparator in terms of other public sector organisations, or if you've got a concept like most similar local authority, to see whether that sort of percentage is good, bad, or about average? Because I think that would give you an indication in terms of what more we need to do. And my third question is more specific. It's around case number 23.1 on your whistleblowing disclosures. That gives me a little bit of concern, the fact that they've got evidence to support the number of allegations, and it's why I asked the question earlier on around procurement. Does this relate to the procurement issue? And is there, how worried should we be? I mean, I'm reassured the fact that somebody's whistleblowing on it, and it actually appears to be a genuine complaint because there's evidence, but it's is, without, wanting to go into anything specific, but really your view in terms of how worried should we be about that? Thank you.
Right, if I start with your first question, first one on the RIPA, etc. and all that, that's looked after by the legal department. So what I'll do is I'll ask the head of legal to provide you with a response on that one, because I'm not really in a position to comment on that. He's the one that provides the written bit on that, and I'm not sure why that's a case. Perhaps it's something I should ask him every now and then, rather than boring, mundane stuff I tend to ask him. But yeah, I will try and secure a response on that one. That's right. The second one, just refresh my mind, that was about the actual comparative. Yes, yeah, yeah. It's an interesting. I know our investigation team, the counter fraud team, they have got an East Midlands groups. They do, they can compare what others are doing on the areas that they're looking at. I mean, perhaps I should say, in the good old days of the Audit Commission, we would have had comparative figures coming out. I mean, the Audit Commission were very, very hot on fraud. In fact, they had a fraud audit manual, which was probably one of the best documents that I've seen in a long time, which took quite a few things. But we don't seem to get that. We get the NFI report coming back, so you can see there how you've done against others. But there's no overall, what everyone's doing against. In a lot of cases, trying to actually put a value on fraud is more difficult. So, I mean, a lot of the frauds we look at, we can't put a value on. We had a case many, many years ago which went to court, which we'd got a value of at over 100,000. They pleaded guilty to 36,000 in court. So again, that's which figure do you take as that? But again, it have been moves over a number of years to try and put a value on fraud as you go through. It's very, very difficult, because it's when we do investigations, you can get to a certain figure, but how far does that go? I mean, I've had these conversations with colleagues when I used to work very, very closely with the economic crime unit at Derbyshire Police about how can we value fraud. And it is a good one. It is something we in audit circles we talk about as well. How can we compare? But it's an area perhaps we ought to explore more as to how can we how big is the problem with fraud? If you're looking at figures, is that going to give you the indicator that you want, or is it just an indicator that yes, there's a bit of fraud happening, but there's a lot of fraud that you're not aware of, and we don't pick up. How big is that? What's the figures of that? And the final one, I'm going to have to be very, very careful here on, because if I say too much, it will identify a person out of this. But you are right with what you're saying. It does involve contracts. Probably I have to be honest, it's probably one of the best whistleblowing cases I've been involved in. And we had a whistleblower that A, told us who they were, B, was happy to meet with us and go through all the evidence. Far too often you find you get anonymous stuff coming through, and you can't. There's nothing you can do with that type of thing, because of you need to do questioning. You can't question anybody anonymous. Who are they? And it's great when you get a whistleblower that comes through actually using whistleblowing, because the policy as it stands, it's there to protect them. And so the evidence they gave us was very, very good. There's an ongoing investigation at the moment, so that's why I can't say too much more on that. But you are right with what you were saying.
Councillor Kerr, and then we'll go to the recommendation.
Thank you. And I always want to pick up on the numbers here and see if you could give us a feel for how often there is an intent to defraud and how often there is just an oversight. Because some people, if it's 10 years since you left university, would you remember that you've got an outstanding loan that you should be declaring somewhere? It might just be an oversight that you've not remembered to say that. Whereas in other cases, it clearly is an intent. But do we have a feel for how much, and how many of those, particularly where you feel that there is intent, are we following that through to prosecution?
In the main, the work of the counter fraud team, it's where they do find intent, and that they'll take that forward. Occasionally, there will be errors. I mean, a lot of the how can we best put this? A lot of the COVID fraud grants were, the BEIS like to deem that as irregular payments. So it's not actually termed as fraud, but the counter fraud team, what their role is to find, they will investigate fraud, and if they think if it's proper fraud, they will see it all the way through. Yes, I agree with what you're saying, Councillor Kerr. There are areas where sometimes it is people have forgotten to do things, and it's not fraud, it's error. So we have to be careful. I mean, error does cost the council money as well. So, but yeah, it's in most of the cases, the ones where we always, from an audit point of view, if we're looking at fraud, we do fact finding first of all to see, what can we establish? Is there evidence there that this is being done deliberately? So we will always make sure that it does take time to do that, and that's the other thing we haven't got a lot of, is to spend a lot of time doing all those checks. So we have to, we have to do what we can within the resources we've got. In terms of prosecutions, that's usually the counter fraud team will take the prosecutions forward. I mean, what I can do is get the senior investigator to perhaps give a briefing to committee at some stage on the work they do. And when we talked about training, be a good insight into the work they do and how they take things through to prosecution.
Okay, brilliant.
Just from my experience, Lucy, you can tell. Look in their eyes. You can tell. No, you can tell. You can tell whether.
And on that bombshell, we will go on to, without no more questions, we'll go on to the recommendation, which is to note the counter fraud annual report for 2022-23, and we're all happy with that. Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. Right, so we will now swiftly move on to item number 11, which is the internal audit progress reports. Let's get to it. So the report author is Head of Internal Audit. So over to you again, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Before we launch into mine, I know Nigel's been sat here for some time. One of the things is the call in that certainly Councillor Kerr and Philip Sundell remember, the bus station audit has been one of the things that's been called in before. Yep. And so rather than Nigel have to sit through me waffling on again about this, I thought it might be best to get Nigel to give an update to committee. Brilliant. Just so committee are aware, the actual significant recommendations are detailed on page 21 28 of the appendix to this item, and also there's a moderate risk as well, which is in the a bit further down on page 23. Yep. So I'll hand over to Nigel so he can do an update to committee on those.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chair. For those who I've not met before, I'm Nigel Bryan. I'm Head of Traffic and Transportation. Bus station falls into my service area. Richard's right, these have been around for a little while, partly because of the staffing levels and the historic processes and some of the equipment in the bus station. Looking at the two issues really, one is around the recharges through the Spectrum system, and basically the update is that the whole Spectrum, the whole foundation of Spectrum and the Spectrum system of ticketing is basically going to be completely taken apart and rebuilt. Okay. The world of passenger transport and the National Bus Strategy and bus service improvement plan from national government has changed the way that we need to look at that. It's changed the funding streams. So basically Spectrum may still exist as a name, but certainly not in the way that it's done here. Okay. Paper ticketing, etc., and the recharging process and the relevance of the deed of variation, for example, which is part of this chain of events, all of that will disappear, and different ticketing mechanisms will come in as part of that process. So effectively, it's just going to go in the next 12 to 18 months. With the toilets, turnstiles, change machines and the cash handling, as we will note from the previous on this, that the bus station toilets have not been taking money now for a significant period. partly through COVID and needing to manage the toilets slightly differently, but actually the equipment isn't fit for purpose. So at the moment, it won't accept money and we can't charge for the toilets. But there is a refurbishment scheme which is starting. Well, it's not quite August yet, is it? Starting in August. I was going to say this month, but I'm getting ahead. Starting in August, which is going to change. Well, it's going to refurbish the toilets themselves and also change the equipment for entry to the toilets. We're looking at potential cashless systems where we end up with a hybrid system where it will take cash and do cashless. Then the use of change will be different. So we'll basically design a whole new process. So that's basically where we are. The recommendations as they are, a kind of time is basically making them redundant in a sense, and the processes and systems that are due to be changed.
Any questions, or are we all happy? Fantastic. Oh, go on, Councillor Kerr.
I'll just say that I think that's very helpful and understandable. In terms of the spectrum, when we're talking about 12 to 18 months, is there anything that can be done in the short term, or is it just not worth it?
It's probably already at a fairly redundant stage, to be honest, in the way that the bus operators have tap on, tap off has changed the game considerably. You know, the fact that you don't even need to get a Mango card now, you can just use your bank card to tap on, tap off, you can use your mobile phone. So that's already put a degree of redundancy into the idea of buying cross-ticket. You can now seamlessly move without having to worry about paper ticketing. I think what we're looking at with Spectrum, its use is declining and has declined significantly. What we're looking at is trying to do something reasonably quickly, working with the enhanced partnership around how a cross-service multi-operator ticket works, but in a non-physical format. And again, you know, the agreements behind that will completely displace the deed of variation requirement.
Brilliant. Okay, so if we're all happy to review the recommendations for 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3, so to note the progress made by internal audit on its works in 2023.
Chair, do you still want to go through the...
Oh, yes, sorry, yes, absolutely. I'm jumping ahead, sorry.
The one thing I would ask, Chair, is do committees still want Nigel to come and do updates on this, or are you satisfied now that you've heard anything? Because I keep putting in every quarter's report, just whether it's getting a bit monotonous now, and you know what you've heard from Nigel is sufficient for you.
I think so. Yeah, we all agreed. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you,
Richard. Thank you very much.
What I'll do now, Chair, is just go through the rest of the report, just pick out one or two items for you. If I start with the progress on the plan, it's moving forward. The one thing I do want to highlight on there is that one thing I've been bringing to the committee several times now is the health and safety one. You can see on page 5 from 21-22. It's been in progress. I can now report that we've now issued a draft on that one. We finally got some work on that. The big problem we had with the health and safety one for the new members of the committee is that it was one of those that came in just at the time of COVID. We were trying to follow up on previous audits we'd done on health and safety where we'd recommended and they'd bought a new system, etc. But unfortunately, the health and safety manager was very, very busy during that period and in the period after that. And so it's been very difficult to get the audit done. So what we've done is we've condensed the scope somewhat and picked on certain areas. And what I can report now is that audit's done, and it's come out, I think, as substantial assurance on it. So again, it's an area. It's because it's more narrow. We are going to pick up on those areas that we couldn't get done this time in later audits. If you see what I mean. But at least that one's, I can now report, has moved on considerably. What I'd like to focus on are the reports that we've finalised, which start on page 6. As you can see there, we've had a number of reports that we've, well, not all reports, items of audit work, we'll call them, that we've finished over the period. Some have come through in the annual audit report because that came out a bit earlier, so they would have been picked up where these had finished in March. Because the last previous report to this wouldn't have picked up all of March. It went to the March committee. But there's 4 substantial in there, 3 reasonable. Concerns around the limited one, building control, which again, the problem with building control is it's no longer a council function, it's a consortium that provides the building consultancy side of things, and catering, stocks and stores, which is, say, no assurance rating, which is, now just to give a bit of background on this one, and certainly members of the committee from previous years will remember, we had, it all came out of an investigation we did around the catering side of things. There was a lot of issues around stock and monies going missing, etc. So we've done quite a bit of work following that investigation as well to see how things are improving, and as you can see there, that things haven't improved at the point of the audit a great deal on stocks and stores, to the point that it basically, in a nutshell, the stocks and store system wasn't working very well at all. Things have changed a lot, and they are, we are keeping a watching brief on this one, but what we need to make sure that management are actually implementing all of these recommendations, because sooner or later, it's going to come back again, and if they don't implement the recommendations, the weaknesses are still there. This is one I would suggest that, not for call-in immediately, but one that committee inquire on from time to time as to how are the recommendations going around that area. Okay. Because you need to be aware if there's no improvement in those areas. I won't go through each individual audit area. It's there for you. If anyone's got any issues, they can perhaps pick them up with us going through. But I wasn't planning on going through each of those. Just wanted to mention about catering, stocks and stores. When it comes on to recommendations, you've heard from Nigel on the bus station. The other one there is the bereavement services one. I've got an update from the head of service. The head of services appeared to the committee a couple of times to go through things. What he's saying is they're still working on a revised business case for a new crematorium. They've also carried out a full reline of one of the cremators due to significant wall collapse. At the moment, they're predicting that the working cremators are in good working order for hopefully the next 2 years. So that's an update on that one. But so they're the key areas there. You can see we've highlighted as well a number of moderate risks. Again, in most cases, there is progress being made. In other cases, we're still trying to get feedback from people as to what's happening. Again, we do chase those, and it's at that point, if we are struggling, I would refer this committee and say perhaps this is an area you should call in and find out, get some more assurance yourselves as to why it's taking a bit longer to implement certain recommendations. We don't normally focus on low-risk recommendations, but committee back in March decided they wanted to call in welfare reform, which we picked under outstanding resolutions, and we will get an officer to the committee as soon as give them a bit of time to pick up on the recommendations that are there and for them to understand what they are. But the other one I think that perhaps the committee needs to give consideration to is around the recommendation in the CSIRO Information Governance Audit Report, which identified that the council's data breach response plan was not subject to regular review. Management agreed action was that response plan would be reviewed every 2 years, with the process being introduced by the end of June 2022. We've now in July 2023, but we've heard nothing say that this is being done. Yeah. So again, it's whether committee feel that that's perhaps something they just want to check out. Okay. The only other thing in there is the QAIP, which is the Quality Assurance and Improvement Plan. And this is basically just running through areas that, as an audit partnership, that CMAP are looking to improve in their areas, and the current positions detailed there. I mean, some areas that we're trying to improve are doing well at Derby, such as, we do have an annual exercise where we support, the effectiveness of the audit committee. And certainly members of the audit, one of the things you'll find come January, February time is I'll be bringing a questionnaire for you all to fill out on what you think is your effectiveness, which is of course something that the external auditor will be monitoring as well.
Yep.
Somehow, either by turning up to meetings or by viewing on YouTube. But one of the key things that they should be doing is how effective is the audit committee? Yeah. And one of the things we do ask you to do is sort of self-assessment. But those members like Councillor Kerr will have filled in numerous of these, and we've now settled on a format for that. So it's something that we'll bring to you again this year. But again, a few of these areas are still in development, and it's finding the time to do these improvements.
Okay.
That's all I've really got to say on that one. If there's any questions,
okay.
I'll...
Any questions for anybody? Councillor Kerr?
4 points. Thank you for the update. In terms of the catering, which it's actually really disappointing that it's so poor, because it was an absolute shambles before, and I thought some people, I don't think the socks have started to be pulled up enough, which is a pity. And it seems to be particularly the arena where you've got concerns. I wondered 2 things on this. One is whether we ever do site visits, and whether it might be interesting to consider threatening them with a site visit, whether that's something that might be of interest. And has there been any look at the management of stocks for consideration of use-by date? Because I just feel that there might be, as the stuff's come out to be used for something and somebody puts it back in again, there's been another delivery, so this goes, it's not necessarily going back in the right order. We may have an issue there that doesn't seem to have been discussed at our level of seeing those responses. That's the first thing. Do you want to?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, one of the things I will say is that there were site visits as part of the audit, but not unannounced ones, which I think you're more talking about. So
I just thought we might go along and have a look.
But
announced or otherwise. Yeah. It might be lovely if they know we're coming in 2 weeks' time.
I mean, we have looked across. It's not just the arena. I mean, the arena was one of the areas we had concerns about, but there are other areas where stocks and stores are maintained on site that we've still got concerns about. And as for the use-by dates, I don't think I'll just look at that. It's not something that we've picked up on, but it's some very good point. I must admit, when I go into Sainsbury's, sometimes I look, and when I see things move forward, I think, oh, and then you look at the back and there's older dates, you think, yes. But yeah, I can see your point on that. So no, we're not. It's not something we've looked at on that, Councillor Kerr.
The second thing I was wanting to raise, Chair, was on the building consultancy, and this seems to me in part to be a contract procurement link, and whether we've got our new procurement process coming into action and make sure that we've got that joined up between the two areas of interest.
What I'll do is I'll speak to the head of service around that, because he's the link between the council and the building consultancy consortium. So I'll seek his views on that, Councillor Kerr.
The food safety report, I can't remember ever seeing such a completely positive report, and I wondered whether we could give them 5 stars for it, which is obviously what they're issuing. And if they wanted to make themselves a little 5-star plaque to go up on whichever bit of the council house they occasionally sit in, I just thought that would be really nice, and we could be the ones who choose that.
Why not? Brilliant.
The final point was this data breach response plan, and this is something that I agree, it's something that particularly we know that some of the statistics about data breaches are not looking good, and I think it's high time that plan was reviewed and looked at again, and I think that's something that we should follow up on.
Yeah. Okay. No, with Councillor Kerr. Anything from anybody else? Are we all good to... So, recommendations 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Are we all happy? Thumbs up, everybody. Fantastic. Cracking. Awesome. 5-star. Absolutely. We'll make them a plaque. order something off Amazon.
It's not something that we do in internal audit. We don't want to be that generous.
It'll be as then. That's fine. Awesome. Right. Okie dokie. So, exciting part now is item number 12, which is the exclusion of the press and the public. And as we can see from the public gallery, we are thronged with spectators this afternoon. So to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following items, that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve and likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part A of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest is maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.